Hi there, I'm Lee Brainerd. Welcome to Soothkeep. Today I would like to encourage you with a testimony nugget. Now, the testimony nuggets are going to be a new series of short videos. They're going to feature conversion testimonies, deliverance testimonies, and stories that illustrate spiritual truth. Now, the short story I'm going to share today is a true story that happened to me. In the fall of 1981, after I was out of the Army, I decided to hitchhike home from Tacoma, Washington to visit my family in Langdon, North Dakota. Now, the hitchhiking went very well when I first left Washington, and I got all the way through eastern Washington and deep into Idaho. And it took me another day or so, and I got out of central Idaho and got through western Montana and into eastern Montana. But when I hit Forsyth, Montana, my fortunes changed. I stood on the side of the highway in Forsyth, Montana from relatively early in the morning until late in the evening when it was starting to reach towards dusk. With my thumb out, hundreds and hundreds of cars passed by. Nobody stopped. Now, this was really unusual because it was usually much easier to get a ride in Montana or North Dakota than it was to get a ride in Washington. But I finally gave up and I just started walking towards a railroad yard, kind of figuring in my mind, do I want to try and spend the night in the railroad yard and then come back to the highway and try a hitchhike again, or maybe I should try and find a train heading east in the railroad yard. Well, in the railroad yard, I found several railroad yard workers and I asked them if there was any trains heading east, and they pointed to the track. So I went over to that track and I found a coal car and I climbed in. But after the sun went down, I started shivering, the temperature started to drop. We were in late September and the nights were dipping into the 40s and into the 30s. So I was dirty too. I mean, this car was nasty black coal dust everywhere. And after an hour and a half in this car, I thought, you know what? This is not a good idea. First of all, I'm going to be cold. And once this train gets moving, there's going to be a 30, 40, 50 mile an hour breeze blowing through this open coal car. And with low temperatures, that's going to be an ugly picture. So I crawled out of this coal car and I started walking up the tracks. And maybe 40, 50 cars up, I found 3 cabooses in the middle of this train. You talk about a provision from God. So I crawled in the caboose. They were laid out really nice with several sets of benches in the low end, and then up in the cupola was like opposing benches. It was pretty cool. So I went to sleep for the night. Very early in the morning, I don't know if it was 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, the train started rolling. And once it started rolling and was a couple miles out of the yard, the Hoboes came out of the woodwork. I thought that me and the kid I was hitchhiking with were the only people on that train. And there was probably, I don't know, close to 20, if not 20 Hoboes on this train. They all gathered somehow they figured out there was cabooses there. They all gathered in these cabooses, in this one caboose, and they had a hobo meeting. And they were swapping notes. It was a fascinating experience because the old-time hobos, they knew which towns, where all the towns were going through. They knew the line. They knew where the orchards were. They knew where the gardens were. They knew where the grocery stores and gas stations were. They knew if there were food banks or anything of that nature. And they knew which supermarkets would be throwing out food in the dumpsters on which days. So this is a goldmine of information. And once this meeting concluded, we decided that in the upcoming town we're going to stop at that morning. The guys knew the train would be stopped for at least an hour and a half, if not 2 hours. So we had plenty of time. We get to this town, and the old-time hobos designated a couple of us rookies along with somebody else to watch us, and we hustled down the tracks to the Safeway dumpster. Now, we hit the jackpot. Folks, this was amazing. We got in that dumpster and there was sausage, there was bacon, there were a carton of eggs, there was pancake mix, there was donuts, there were sweet rolls, there was orange juice, there was coffee, there was chocolate. It was an amazing haul. When we come back down the tracks with bags full of stuff, our arms were loaded. I think we emptied out a couple of potato sacks, kept some of the potatoes, and just stuffed them full of all these groceries that we found. We got back, the guys had already rounded up like a 5-gallon pail, a metal pail, and made a fire in it, rounded up a pile of firewood. They found like an old refrigerator shelf grate that we were using for a grate to cook food on, and someone else found a little slab of sheet steel that we used for a griddle. Pretty soon we had eggs and bacon and pancakes going, and we were cooking coffee in a coffee can or some kind of a can that we found. And folks, we had an amazing time. That was an amazing meal. We had a feast fit for a king. Now, what's interesting about this is many people would be ashamed to eat out of a dumpster. And I never had that problem. When I was growing up, I did a little dumpster diving and I did a little curb shopping. Found some cool stuff. But I do empathize with people that are nervous about diving in dumpsters. They might have health issues and they might have shame issues. But folks need to understand that shame is relative. If our economy here in America went down the toilet, completely down the toilet, and food stamps were very, very difficult to get or impossible to get, welfare was difficult to get or impossible to get, people's squeamishness over food sources would die in a hurry. They would not be ashamed to go to the local food bank. They wouldn't be ashamed to go to a Dent and Bent store. They wouldn't be ashamed to beg from their neighbors. They wouldn't be ashamed to go dive in a dumpster. When people are hungry, shame goes out the window. Now, I didn't tell the story as an end in and of itself. I didn't tell the story simply because I like to tell my story about the time I rode the rails with the Hoboes, even though it is a fun story to tell. This story illustrates the need for us to be watchmen who are true Bereans. The church is filled with many errors in our day, and that's part of the obligation of the watchman, is to keep tabs of the greatest errors of our day that are a threat to evangelical Christianity, or that are a threat to dispensationalism, and to deal with them. Now, popular error, whether it's held in a small circle, whether it's held broadly or widespread, error always works the same way. Error regards the opposing truth as garbage fit for the dumpster. And so, if you're going to go after the truth, you have to face the reproach of being a dumpster diver. And when people are on this path of regarding the truth as garbage fit for the dumpster, then they're oblivious to much of the truth that's out there. They don't care about it. And when you present truth to them, they reject it. You can give them well-framed arguments. You can give them a massive pile of facts, and they will sneer at it as garbage. Now, this mocking intimidates many people. They don't want to have a reputation amongst their own circle of friends or their own church or their own group or their own association. They don't want to have a reputation for being a dumpster diver. They don't want to be sneered at or mocked. So there's a moral here, folks. We need to be Bereans when controversy finds us. Now, typically, we don't go looking for controversy. Controversy finds us. But when we find ourselves in a controversy, doesn't matter if it's over evangelical doctrine or over the doctrines of salvation or over prophetic doctrine, whatever the controversy is, step away from that controversy get a little elevation, remove yourself from it so that your emotions aren't tangled up in it. Refuse to weigh the issue like people against people, or denomination against denomination, favorite preachers against less favorite preachers. Don't weigh it that way. Don't put your emotions in this situation. Get yourself in a place where you're objectively determined to weigh nothing but the arguments and the evidence presented by both sides. You'll just reject everything else. It's irrelevant. All you want is the arguments, the facts, the evidence. And then decide which side brings out the most evidence, the best evidence. Which side brings out stuff that has the ring of truth. And which side brings out more or less just a whole bunch of ad hominem arguments. This is how controversies usually go. In a typical scenario, people are going to teach bad doctrine. They'll call out orthodoxy. Orthodoxy responds with overwhelming force, and then error ignores the evidence. And they plead the victim card like they're being attacked, and then they respond with virtually nothing but ad hominem arguments. I've watched this play out on 100 different issues, folks, over the last 4 decades. This method never changes. Now, there's a principle in football known as running for daylight. You train your running backs to look for the hole, get all the daylight you can, and run for daylight. Well, it's a very similar principle that we have here when the watchmen are trying to be Bereans. As the game of, or the controversy is rolling on, you look for the facts. You run for the facts. You run for the evidence. You run for the historical grammatical hermeneutic, the most robust, consistent application of the historical grammatical hermeneutic. Because, folks, ultimately, you want the facts. You want the big pile of evidence. You want the historical grammatical hermeneutic applied consistently and robustly. And you want that no matter who calls it garbage. No matter who says it's garbage fit for the dumpster. You just have to get beyond that reproach stage and just determine in your heart. You don't care about the emotional aspects of the argument. You don't care about favorites or not favorites. You don't care about your best friends or your worst friends. You don't care about all those emotional aspects. They're all irrelevant. You just want to get to the issue and find out who's giving the best arguments and the best evidence and side with that. That's what it means to be a watchman. That's what it means to be a true Berean. Because the bottom line is, one man's garbage is another man's treasure. What one man turns his nose up at is another man's meal fit for a king. At any rate, folks, eyes wide open, brain engaged, heart on fire. We'll see you next time.